Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today's video is a follow-up on a video where I talked a little bit about communication styles and partnerships. When you live in the world that we live in a heteronormative world, and you're in a queer relationship, communication has another layer of tough that isn't in any of the brochures. And a comment I made in an earlier video was about using I statements and other tools that you could use in your relationship in order to keep communication clear and helpful. We communicate with people in our own communication style instead of their communication style. And it happens across the board in jobs, with friendships, with kids, with parents, with partners. So here's some communication styles and how they work in partnerships and why that's important. Even if you're not in a partnership with someone right now, I would suggest watching this. Maybe you can identify your communication style and then encourage others to communicate more effectively with you. Or I don't know, with a friend or with a boss or I don't know, with the neighbor down the street. We communicate every day, and to communicate more effectively would benefit everyone. We're going to define communication as the process of conveying and taking in ideas and opinions, aka information. Generally, there are four main styles. We're going to start with number one. An analytical communicator is comfortable communicating with facts, things that actually happened, not perception. Perception really muddies the water a bit. They ask questions about numbers. They'll say, where's the data from? They'll ask, how do we know? And are you sure? So if you come home from a hard day at work and you tell your partner, I think these people are talking about me, and you have an analytical communicative partner, that partner is going to say to you, well, who are the people? How do you know they're talking about you? They're going to want facts that are not tainted by emotions. So the analytical person is looking for details and will be very likely to be working towards a solution. Does that mean someone who communicates analytically is not emotional? Of course not. It just means their default communication mode is going to be unemotional and linear. What happened? Then what? Then what? Then what? What do you have to back that up? Okay, where are we going? On the other end of the emotion gamut, we have the functional communicator, which is emotional and also linear. A functional communicator likes to be in control of a process. They're likely to ask questions like, what happens first? How long does it take? Who does what? When you're describing your job or an activity you're involved with to your partner and they're a functional communicator, they're going to want to know those details. Those details matter to them. What's the process at which someone gets on the team? Or if something has happened with a superior, they're going to know what the process is of getting things handled, right? The functional communicator is more concerned with the process of something than the destination or even where you start. They're in the meat, they're in the middle. That's where the emotion is, right? But they're still linear because there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're just in the middle instead of the beginning and the end like the analytical. The intuitive communicator is unemotional and free form. So this is not very linear, and this is going to drive some linear thinkers absolutely bonkers in some ways. However, an intuitive communicator could work very well with an analytical communicator because an intuitive communicator wants to bottom line it. Their questions are, where does this get us? Can we bottom line this? Can we skip to the end? If you're communicating with an intuitive communicator, start with the end in mind. I need help with this situation. And then give the situation. I just want you to listen to me, then say it. Don't ask a leading question when talking to an intuitive communicator. That's going to drive them bonkers. The end that you're trying to get to is just not clear in that situation. And so they're going to be more interested in what's the end goal than answering the actual question. For instance, if you're trying to decide what to have for dinner and you've got an intuitive thinker, you say to them, I don't know what I want for dinner. What do you want? Instead of what do you want for dinner, and hide the end statement of I don't know what I want. Does that make sense? You go to the end first because then the intuitive thinker can track with you as you tell the rest of the story. And then you've got your personal communicator, which is both free form and emotional. This is like the analytical thinker's nightmare because it has nothing to do with the story or storyline or timelines in any way. They just want to establish interpersonal relationships. They're going to use feeling words. They're going to make sure that you feel valued or make sure everyone is valued. And they're going to be interested in what you feel and what you do with that. That is, in reality, the stereotypical therapist, right? Is that personal communicator? Like, tell me how you feel and how does that make you feel? I'm going to be honest, that is not how all therapists communicate, but that is how the stereotypical, media therapist communicates, right? So those four ways of communication, everyone generally falls into one. And if you're not sure which one you fall into, think about how you communicate when you're stressed. Think about how you communicate when someone annoys you, when you're pressed into those corners where you don't have time to be generous with your time or with your attention, how do you tend to communicate? Which of those do you fit into? That is probably your default communication. Now, in that video, I talked about how important it was to have your partner repeat to you what they heard you say. Communication in relationships is not just about conveying ideas and opinions like the overall definition of communication. The end goal of all communication in a relationship is to enhance the bond you share with the person you're talking to. If you don't care to enhance a bond with someone, you're probably not going to communicate with them, right? And we could talk all day about nonverbal communication, which is honestly in a lot of ways a much bigger deal in relationships than verbal communication. But right now, we're just dealing with verbal. As humans, we love each other how we need to feel loved. And often we love each other out of our deficits of love. So say you grew up without a parental figure that you felt would really fulfill this role, you are likely to start to find ways as you become an adult to fill this role in other people's lives so they never have to do that. We love often out of our deficits, which is a great way to try to strike balance in the world, because in reality, we're all always looking for balance. But we do the same thing with communication. And so if I'm an intuitive communicator and my wife is an analytical communicator and she's linear and I'm like, bottom line it for me, get me to the end before you start, she feels not heard, because she needs to go through the process start to finish. And I just don't need that much information until I know where we're going. Conversely, if I start with where I want to end up on something, she's looking for the rest of the conversation when I'm looking for input on a decision. That's not helpful. Add to that the layers of not knowing how to communicate well with people for a lot of our lives, because, hey, who taught you how to communicate effectively? Probably for most of you, no one intentionally did that, right? I know no one intentionally did that for me. Most people don't know how to communicate effectively, and therefore, even if they wanted to, which, let's be real, some people don't, even if they wanted to communicate with their partner effectively, they don't know their own way to communicate, much less their partner's. So they try to get their partner on their page by what they know. We usually mimic the communication that we were raised with. So if it was chaotic communication, if it was loud, if it was passive aggressive, if it was just passive, if it was clear, if it was uplifting, like all of those things play into the way that we talk to our partners when we get older, or our friends ever. And in that, we end up sort of like passing each other, because one partner's communicating this way and one partner's communicating this way, and we're like, why aren't we getting it? And it leads to actual argument and discontent within the relationship. When you are in conflict with a partner, one of the best pieces of advice I can give people is to ask them to repeat back to you what they heard you say. Okay, so once you figured out how you communicate, the next job that you have is to figure out how your partner communicates. Either have the partner watch this video or talk to them about it, or just in your own head, how do you see it? Maybe compare the answer to theirs, because it's also possible you don't know how they communicate. That communication piece goes even deeper than making sure that you're communicating in your partner's language. It's also communicating on your partner's time and showing that affection, that deeper connection in their language too, okay? I'm not just talking about love languages, although those are a handy thing to go back to. If you know your love language and you know your partner's love language, then you're able to love them in the way that they need to be loved, and vice versa. They're going to be able to love you in the way that you need to be loved. We experience those things through that lens. Just like the verbal communication piece, we experience that love and care through the lens of what we have always known. In trying to love the other person your way, you are devaluing a bit, unintentionally usually, the relationship, because you've made it about you. You've made it about how you understand love or how you understand communication. Without taking that into consideration, you're not taking your partner into consideration. Because honestly, the way that we understand love and the way that we understand communication is vital to how we understand our relationships going. Communication is hard. It is really hard to sit down and talk to someone and not feel like you're talking past each other or feel like you're on the same page all the time. And sometimes communication is great and just rocking and you're understanding things and you're talking and about everything in the world, right? And then there's times where communication feels like it's less. The connection feels like it's happening less sometimes. In those times, it is just as important to make sure you're communicating verbally and non-verbally in the way your partner needs, not in the way that you need. When we communicate with someone in the way that we understand it, or when we communicate something that's maybe not entirely true because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, we are making the communication about us. It's about us. It's not about the other person. And communication should always be about that relationship, whether it's a friend, a parent, a child, a boss, a partner. Your communication should always be with the goal of enhancing the relationship, because effective communication deepens any relationship. It brings trust into a relationship, and it brings the understanding that both of you are valued in that give and take of communication in a way, let's be real, a lot of the world doesn't value anyone, because our world is really bad at communicating right now. We are really bad at communicating what's important and what we see in front of us and how we feel about things, because there's so much out there. So starting simple with communication that helps to enhance the relationship is always a place to start. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.